So in 2004, the movie The Passion of the Christ came out. Show of hands if you remember that. Show of hands, how many of you saw it? Fewer. At Sheridan, what we did, we had just moved into this facility, and what we did was we actually rented a movie theater, and we all went and saw it together. I think there were 125, 150. There was a lot of folks who went and saw it. And then we actually, after the movie, reconvened in this space, and about 100 folks, we had a discussion. You may remember the movie, or if you don't know, the movie was highly controversial. It was really awesome, and it served as an amazing example. It taught a lot and taught well, but it was so violent. It was widely criticized because of how violent the movie was. We've shown it regularly over the course of years. And I always say, I'm the movie guy, so I'm the one who kind of does the movie discussion. I always say that it's genius as a movie, right? I mean, remember that that's what it is. It's a movie. It's helpful, and it shows us an example, but it is just a movie. But as a movie, it's sheer genius, because any really good movie will tell you what it's about at the beginning. They'll give you hints or clues to kind of say, this is what we're trying for. This is the goal. This is what we're shooting for. And Mel Gibson, who was the person behind the movie and the director of the movie, he made it very clear that he made this movie out of his Roman Catholic faith. And what was the first thing that you see when the movie starts is a quote from Isaiah 53. It was the end of this quote, which is, he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And here's the phrase that was on the movie screen. And by his wounds we are healed. Now, maybe it's just my Roman Catholic upbringing, because I did go to Catholic school, but I was taught very clearly that the reason that Jesus suffered and died was because of our sin. Again, he died for the sin of the world, but even more specifically than that, I was taught as a child that he died because of my sin. And when he was there in the classroom, hanging on the wall, he was looking down on me in my sinfulness as a second grader, and that I was the reason why he was there, and that the pain that it was exacted on him was because of me. And that was always really hard, but it was actually because of us all, right? And so, we struggle with that reality. I mean, that's just really hard for us. I talked about the movie because that's what the movie shows. The movie was him being beaten for the sin of the world. Jesus in the movie got a world's worth of beating. And that was hard to watch, that suffering. My only criticism of the movie was that it was 90 minutes of kind of torturous stuff in 90 seconds of resurrection. And I think to have been more fair, it would have been better to have it be 90 minutes of torturous stuff and then 120 minutes of actual good stuff. Because again, we aren't Catholic, we are Lutheran, and we are an Easter people, so our crosses are bare, because that's who we are. The reviewers of the movie said, and so did many faithful folks, it was just too much. It was just too brutal. I know of folks who've said really clearly, I haven't seen the movie and I never will. It's too much. It's over the top. It's too much for me. And they're not wrong. Because that was actually Mel Gibson's point. That each sin of each and every individual person was extracted and beaten into Jesus. He absorbs that for us for the sin of the world. The key scene in the movie, and even if you saw it probably originally and have never seen it again, you might remember these faces. The key scene was the guards. And there was a whipping scene that takes, 10 minutes or so. And it was just terrible. The faces of those guys, they will always be etched in my mind, because that scene was just so brutal. But they showed how bloodthirsty they were They were guys who just for sport wanted to bring as much pain as they possibly could out of another human being. And at that point, it was Jesus who actually even seemed to want the pain inflicted upon him. It was torturous. And it was how it was in those days. Folks gathered in the public square to watch this. I mean, they certainly didn't have TV, they didn't have WWE, they didn't have the NFL. That was their sport. And there was a bloodthirstiness and a cruelty of those days. The movie, at the end of the day, the movie was criticized, but it was true in that it highlighted the stark contrast between how the world was then and how the world is now. How the world was then and how the world is now. We are a much less brutal society now than we were then. And I know some of you might be saying, I don't know, we're pretty brutal right now. I'm not saying that the world is any less cruel, because I think we are just as cruel. But I don't know that we're as brutal. For example, show of hands, how many of you have ever dressed a chicken? Pretty good. How many of you have done it lately? We eat a lot of chicken, but we don't do that anymore. How many of you ever field dressed a deer? There's a brutality in that, right? That's not for the faint of heart. When we hunt for sport, that is the reality. And, for as much as we've progressed, we have to say that the brutality we experience day to day has gone down. To borrow a phrase, we don't get our hands wet. Our understanding of brutality in the world we see in movies or games or on videos. And that isn't a direct interaction the way it used to be. We're only 100 years removed from folks dressing their own chickens multiple times a week. And again, we just simply don't do that anymore. Now, I will raise this disclaimer that I'm not saying that the world is any less cruel. We've just found new ways to be cruel. Right? Our heart is still the same collectively, but we just don't interact with it the way that we used to. I mean, our cruelty has morphed into isms, racism, anti-Semitism, how we gossip, how we bully, and especially how we do it shielded behind a computer screen so nobody really knows who we are. The world isn't any easier. It's just that the brutality that's forced upon us physically has changed. It's different now than it was even 100 years ago, certainly way different now than it was 2,000 years ago. And that movie shows us how it was 2,000 years ago, which is a part of why we don't like it. And that is part of why some people avoid that movie, because that's how it was. I will raise for you just this point, that in the same way that people avoid the movie The Passion of the Christ because of its brutality, I believe that there's a part of each one of us that wants to avoid Lent. Because in the season of Lent, we experience a brutality that we have decided is no longer a part of our world or should be, and yet we realize that it can be and that it still is in certain places and in certain times. We don't like hearing the story of Jesus brutally hurt, and it is part of our process to have whitewashed that. We would rather avoid Lent than listen too closely, because again, we see and hear just how torturous it is. Every single gospel talks about the guards. Every single gospel talks about what they did to Jesus. Every single gospel has Jesus being hit and spat upon and degraded. We don't hear much about actually how he was tortured by the guards and the whipping. It just kind of says that he was flogged. But you know what? That was written for a first century audience, and they didn't need to have it spelled out. Because people in the first century knew. They knew what that was like. And so that's been lost in translation because it didn't get spelled out because they didn't need it back then, and then we miss it and we whitewash it. Kind of like the whole concept of the cross. I mean, we decorate the cross beautifully. We wear crosses, we decorate with crosses, and as we should, not saying that we shouldn't do that, but we forget that the cross was created to be as inefficient and torturous an instrument as it could possibly be. The cross was created to kill someone as slowly as possible, to extract as much pain from them as you could. There are lots of quicker ways to execute someone. The point of the cross was to do it as miserably, as brutally, and as torturously as one could. And we've forgotten that. We have. And where we are now, we don't want to believe in a world this cruel. We don't want to believe in a world in which people would do that to each other. We don't want to believe in a world in which our God, who we love so much, would come and have to endure all of that. We don't want to believe in a world in which our God would have to endure all that because of me. We don't want to believe in a world in which that level of cruelty exists within our own selves. And we certainly don't want to believe in a world in which we get it wrong. Because that's what this text was about. As we heard Ronnie read of Jesus dying on the cross, at the end, when all was said and done, the centurion, the head guard of all guards, the head guard, the guard of all guards. And remember, they had guards who protected them while they tortured people so that no one would interfere. The guard of all guards stood at the base of the cross and basically admitted, we got this wrong. That this man actually was God's son. And the problem for us is that we realize how wrong we get things. And we don't want to get it wrong. We don't want to believe in a world in which there's that much cruelty, that much brutality, and that for a short moment anyway, that cruelty and that brutality wins. It's just all too much. And in many ways, rightfully so. But I was in my study, I saw a sermon from a pastor named Dale Johnson, and he said these words about the Bible, which I believe to be so accurate. In Lent, we come face to face with God. We come face to face with this God who would come here and who would choose, because of sin and of the limitation of time and space and the sin that we have this God who would remove our sin from us, take the punishment for us. We come face to face with a God who loves us that much, who would endure that level of brutality. But we also, during Lent, come face to face. We come face to face with ourselves and the brutality and the cruelty that is in our own hearts. How we choose to be cruel to others, to choose to dislike for scant a reason at all. This is what we come in touch with during Lent. And we don't want to get this wrong. Our greatest fear in the midst of it is that we might get to the end of our lives, we might get to the end of it all and say exactly what we heard the centurion say. And again, we hear in verse 45 of Matthew 27 that when the centurion and those who were keeping watch saw the earthquake and all that was happened, they said, truly this man was God's son. And we don't want to be that one. And so my encouragement for you, my recommendation for you, is that you steward your walk. We're 2/3 of the way through Lent. We got 2 weeks left. And these are the 2 weeks which are probably the most vital, because it's really easy to come here next Sunday and celebrate with Palm Sunday. It'll be really easy to then skip a whole week and come back on Easter and have a great time celebrating. That's the easiest thing to do. And it's there for you. My hope and prayer for you is that you will actually walk with Jesus all the way to the cross, that you will worship again and again, as we have so many worships that you can participate in, but that you will hear how he died and how he rose, that you will hear and see our God face to face, that you will experience this God who loves you so much that he would do that for you, and that you would offer up to God the cruelty that's in your own self, that's in your own heart, that you will see yourself face to face in the people who are walking alongside of him, and that you will purge yourself of that, understanding that all of the cruelty and brutality that resides in your heart, that Jesus bore for you and removes that from you. Let us walk with our Savior, battered and broken, because when we do it fully and rightly, we will get it right, and we will know that truly he was God's Son. Amen.